This is the 3D audio technology, spatial audio panel, and I guess I'll have everyone in a second kind of introduce themselves. But I'm Richard, and I have a audio production company in LA that has done a lot of work in VR and whatnot. So we've kind of used a lot of the spatial audio technologies. But there's a lot of misconceptions and things floating around, especially in the last year. And I hope we can maybe kind of touch on and delve into some of that. 3D audio, spatial audio at its core, it's not specific to VR, this technology, but sound that is localized in the world. There's a waterfall over there and it's emitting the sound, and you can kind of get closer to it and it gets louder and you get further from away. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. That's audio and it's spatial, but it's not this. We're talking about technology that uses specific things like HRTF functions and more advanced things to give more realistic interpretations of the actual human perception of sound, but simulated through headphones. And I'm going to let you guys dive more into this, but that's kind of what we're touching on here, the uses there. And if everyone kind of want to maybe just briefly introduce their background, that'd be fantastic. Penka?
My name is Penka Kuneva. I'm a freelance composer, and I've been a freelance composer for almost 19 years. Started in film, jumped from film into video games, which was sort of my most substantial contribution in my career. And most recently from games, I got an amazing job to compose for a NASA exhibit at the Kennedy Space Center, which had spherical 3D cinematic experiences where the audience is positioned inside a sphere, also bona fide VR and a lot of AR museum iPods. So I composed music for all of that, and also I composed music for the VR game, The Mummy.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Adam Levinson. Actually, I'm pretty new to this whole spatial audio thing, like as of 4 weeks ago. But I am far from new when it comes to audio. I have, over 2 decades. I'm not going to say exactly how many years because then you'll be able to guess how old I am. Over 2 decades of experience in game audio. I was head of sound at Activision for many years. And I've done a lot of other stuff, like I headed up a audio content production company, worked for a VST plugin company, worked for a middleware company. It's been quite a journey. And now I'm working for G Audio Lab, which is a spatial audio company based in Los Angeles.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Calloway. I'm currently kind of in between jobs, which is a really fun place to be because I get to do a lot of research on my own. My background is actually in sound design, sound recording, and specifically for game audio. So I worked at Sega Studios Australia when we were working on the London Olympics game, and that was a lot of fun. And then I did my master's degree in acoustics and psychoacoustics, worked for FMOD for a little while, and then also worked at a VR game company, and then last year at a 3D audio tech company startup thing. That was fun.
Hi, I'm Ubesh Thakur. I'm now a product manager of audio at Facebook. I have a bit of an experience for the last few years. So I had a company called Two Big Ears back in Edinburgh, Scotland, which was focused on VR audio technologies, which was then bought by Facebook a couple of 1.5 years ago or so now. We still do the same thing, but looking at Facebook scale of these things. So when you actually have a video being uploaded, instead of 1,000 views that we would be excited by, that was literally the amount of views we got when we had our first demo on YouTube. We now look at ridiculous numbers like 540 million hours on a regular basis. It's stupid. But what it allows me to look at is the application of new technologies that are specific for VR, which is still a niche audience, but apply it to scale for a Facebook 2 billion plus audience as well.
Awesome. We have a really diverse panel here in terms of background, so that's fantastic. Abesh, I'd love to start with you. You've been in this from the beginning. Abesh had his company, Two Big Ears, making one of the first spatial audio and arguably the best initially spatial audio plugins for interactive content over at Two Big Ears. Can you just kind of give us the background? What is 3D spatial audio technology? What does it hope to accomplish? How does it do it? And what are you up to now?
Sure, yeah, and just to end that, I think it's much easier to be the best when you're alone in the field. Yeah, literally, we were one of the first companies to launch a plugin which does spatial audio specifically aimed at VR, but we were by no means the first company to use the technology. This has been around for 80, 90 years with Rutherford's. Yeah. So it's 1908, I think that was the first paper looking at spatial distribution and so on. That was my thesis too. But so essentially what we do, or what we try to do with spatial audio, is nothing fancy. It's actually recreating what we as humans are accustomed to hearing with our own 2 ears in real life. And it's when you move across to media, whether it's linear media or non-linear media, such as games and so on, people might have been used to some amount of sound coming out of their TV speakers or headphones, it started as mono and then stereo, and then we had surround and so on. But what spatial audio, or the way we look at it right now, aims to do is recreate the original human experience of being able to localize the sound and also being able to tell where the listener and the source is in a space, so whether we are in an auditorium or whether we are outside, so on. So it should be able to mimic the characteristics of plane wave, sound wave propagation, and give enough idea for the person to be convinced they are living in an alternate or a mixed reality. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. There are multiple ways of doing things. There is no particular standard. There's a lot more buzz now because of VR, again, being a new thing at this point of time. But that being said, the technologies have existed, and it's mostly a matter of the form and function it is used in, the context it is used in, and who makes use of it.
And Facebook has, Facebook Oculus has basically two core technologies, is that right? Kind of the linear tool, the 360 spatial workstation, and then the Oculus Audio SDK. So can you just kind of, though they aim to accomplish the same ultimate end goal of spatial audio, how do they differ?
Absolutely. I can touch on the Oculus part as well because we work with the teams very closely. So the Oculus Audio SDK as it exists is very focused on the interactive, the game side of things. So you have plugins which can be pulled into a game engine, whether it's something like Unity, Unreal, or through a middleware such as Wise or whatever, a custom engine as well, because they, I think, also distribute the SDKs. But the aim is, what we at Facebook do right now is look at linear media. So you're still in your Pro Tools session, you still have a timeline, and you know what will happen at each sample of that timeline. And yet you need the audio to react to things like head movement or positional tracking, whatever you want to involve. So the audio ends up being dynamic, basically starts being a second cousin to game audio, which is always super, super advanced. But the video, even though you might look at cinematic VR or 360 video, it's still linear. You know what each frame consists of. So even though the audience may choose to shift their field of view, they might choose to look left, that part is already rendered. Whereas with audio, what we want to do is not only do we have a linear timeline, but the spatialization, so something that sounds on my left, the moment I look at it, it's now in front of me. That's actually unique to the audio. And a lot of times, I keep on hearing people talking about how advanced the graphics are, or the video is. It's audio that's actually doing the real cutting-edge stuff, which not everybody understands because you assume, well, of course, it should be on my left. That's the hallmark of good sound production. So that's what we at Facebook do. We look at linear media production. So we have a set of tools which allows you to do that. Basically, take the best of game audio and merge it into linear production. And the Oculus team looks at more interactive plugins.
Yeah, and just to also recap, something we haven't necessarily said is, left, right, this has all been there forever, but, the elevation, the rear, that's what these plugins really kind of shine in terms of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It could be anecdotal, but when you do speak about spatial audio, want to explain what this is, people often would just compare it to surround sound, but then the retort is it's not 5.1, it's not just localized 5 positions in space, but it is a true sphere where you would not be able to distinguish the sound moving between speakers. It would actually move along a clean azimuthal or an elevation point, or when it is behind you at a certain distance, or when you implement things like near-field HRTFs, you can actually tell it's behind your ears. It is not just flitting between speakers. It is not just coming out of a discrete point in space. People normal people who are not used to it, they get the idea of the sound moving around, but when you're actually creating content, it affects a lot of things that we'll discuss later on.
It really changes the design of the actual sound. You design differently, but yeah. Anyway, so Adam, I mean, arguably works, G Audio is arguably a competitor in terms of products, not necessarily competitor, but alternative thing that does a very, similar outcome. What are you guys doing differently, or what is the approach? End goal, same thing. What's different about the G Audio technology, and maybe we can also then touch on some other solutions available too.
Well, ours is the best.
Well, of course.
Far superior. No. I just want to touch on something that you said before I answer your question, which is Abesh started by saying that this is actually simple. But I remember...
He's really smart.
But yeah, but like we're like really immersed in it. And I remember when Surround came out for games, Dolby introduced Surround for games, and we were all like, what the hell is this? The center channel? What is this LFE thing? And there was a lot of like banging your head against the wall, like, what is going on? I don't understand. How do I mix for this? And that went on for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, we all kind of got it, and we were like, this is really like stupidly simple. What was the problem back then? But I think that there's like an adjustment period, and I think that we're in that right now. Okay, so back to G Audio and why it's different from Facebook. When I look out there at the environment with all of these different products, and by the way, I mean, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look around, but there's just so many different technologies out there. No two are really exactly alike, and sometimes you'll see major differences.
We were on a call yesterday, and we were like, oh, there's only like 3 or 4, right? And then or two or three.
There's like 20.
And then as we were going down, we were like, oh, and that one. I mean, there's G Audio, Google Resonance,
right.
Sony SCE, Oculus Audio SDK, Steam VR, Spatial Audio,
it just goes on and on and on.
Sonic, Real Space 3D, Atmos, RO 3D, many other things.
So that's one of the challenges for all of us, is sorting all of this out. But anyway, to try to answer the question. So basically, G Audio has been focused on 360-degree video until basically very recently, when we're just about to launch our middleware product. But on the 360 video side, what makes us different is our proprietary format, our proprietary encoded format. The output from our production tool supports ambisonics, supports object-based, and supports channel-based sound. So all three of those things are possible to capture, provided that you use our proprietary renderer. So it's a complex ecosystem that I would encourage everyone to like study. But that's the key difference. Is some people only support first-order ambisonics, some people only support high-order ambisonics. Our difference is that we support ambisonics, object-based, and channel-based, all in the same format, and we have a proprietary renderer that is codec agnostic. So just to make things even more interesting, some solutions are codec specific, which is a problem, because most of our devices use AAC or something that is ubiquitous, like AAC. Our system allows you to use any codec. So it's that might sound super geeky and technical, but these are like the basic differences.
Yeah, and also, it's interesting to touch on the perspective of linear, spatial audio design happens in the DAW, right? There's mixing in Pro Tools or whatever DAW you're using, Reaper, and it happens there, and the design happens there. But with a game, much like also with traditional game design, game audio design, you're making your assets, but you're not previewing your spatialized audio in the DAW. You're doing that in the engine, and so there is this disconnect that maybe will be bridged a bit more as we move forward. But when you're designing a sound in the DAW, you really aren't usually hearing how it's going to sound through the Oculus Audio SDK or Google Resonance in the DAW. So if you do have to go back and make revisions, you have to put it in game, hear it, then go back to the DAW. Whereas with linear tools, you don't have to, like the 360 Spatial Audio and G Audio's tool. So an interesting side note. But yeah, good stuff. Anyway. Yeah, lots of solutions. Where were we on to next? Let's see. Sally, yeah, this is, you've kind of come from the place of definitely using a lot of these tools, right? These two guys are kind of creating them. What's it been like, picking an audio solution, and what are the decisions that lead you to pick one over the other when working in game? And yeah, we'll start there.
Yes, it's like the process that as a creator that you should go through in selecting your spatialization tool is very similar to, it can be similar to the process that you use when you're selecting other types of software tools as well. So at some point you have an idea of like what the project will be, like the content itself, and then also how it will be consumed as well. So what output formats that you might need and what sort of devices it's going to be published to as well. Adam, you made the point just before about, we include a lot of different technologies within our encoder. We're able to encode and decode those. And you were like, it's really technical, but it's actually really important as well. It's like, as a content creator, like if I'm going to pick a spatializer, I actually need to know that that spatializer is going to do, like, it's going to spit out the right thing at the end. Otherwise, like, I could spend like many hours like designing the sound and putting like the perfect like drop-off curve in there, like attenuation curve, and then you get to the end and it's like, oh, it won't publish to Daydream. Oops. Like, this is probably not going to fly with your dev team. They're probably going to roll their eyes at you or something. So it's one of those things that you need to do a lot of research into, is making sure that that tool that you're about to select is actually going to do what you need it to on the end. Another thing to consider is also, do you like the sound of it at all? Because all these different spatialization tools, like HRTF processing is technically adding a layer of filtering and coloration to your sound so it mimics what's happening with your ear. But each of these different tools, they all have their own kind of sound. And it's actually like, while your ears and your perception of what you're hearing, it may not be perfect, and it's certainly not going to be like anything that anyone else will hear through that tool, you're going to have an idea pretty immediately when you listen to any content through it, whether that coloration is something that you want at all. Some of them sound good or sound clear. They don't really sound like they're there, but it works. And others sound like not good.
and this also leads to, what content do you put into it? The first game we did, we put everything in the spatializer. We were like, oh my God, it's so spatial. And then like we were like, a month later, we were like, wow, this sounds terrible. You have to be selective, about the content that you are choosing to spatialize.
Yeah, whether it's whether the tool will do ambisonics, whether you need to use that, whether that's included in your pipeline as well. There's so many little things. So once you clear those decisions and actually start experimenting it, like with it, that's when you actually go through and you get to do what Richard was just talking about, where you get to define your practice and your prioritization of what you're actually spatializing and to what extent as well, which is a whole other like barrel of fun.
And performance too, some are more CPU intensive, Google's Resonance is very mobile, but it has less features, but it's more mobile savvy. And also another interesting topic that came up with discussing this with Gordon McGladdery from A Shell in a Pit was, is the tool going to be around when the game ships, right?
Gosh,
I mean, it's such a
thing.
We have been slightly guilty.
Yeah, no
like,
offense.
You can't
to
hold
others,
anyone like accountable for that. Like at the end of the day, these businesses, like, it's very difficult to make money with software. So if Facebook comes along and says like, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of money for this cool thing that you made, and also you get to keep making it, it's like nobody's going to like beat you up in the corridor or anything. Yeah,
but I think and Gordon made a really interesting point though of waiting until later in development to actually pick the tool. If you know you're going to be on a project for 2 years, maybe you don't lock in the tool and do the full mix with that tool until closer to the end.
I think you should have a tool early.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth
like,
on this.
Otherwise, you can't scale, like, you can't really predict what's going to happen with performance early on.
Yeah, no,
But I think that's part of the, like, earlier today with the Star Wars talk, like, you actually mentioned that you had to do a lot of internal evangelizing within your company, explaining what 3D audio is and why you needed to spend 3 times longer doing it this time around. And it's because, like, not everyone that you work with is going to have the same priorities as you as a creative person that's working in sound and audio. You actually need to kind of go to them like, hey, like, if we're on this project for 2 years, like, this is kind of what's been happening with some of the other tools. So I've made the best selection that I can right now, but we kind of, it might be something that we need to revise in a year or 18 months or something. So I hope not. This one's already been bought once, so it should be okay, but like, it's part of your job, like in evangelizing and educating upwards from yourself, so that everyone that's on your team doesn't like take you out into the corridor and beat you up later on.
For sure. Yeah. Well, so Panka's on the side of things where, you know, there's usually an audio team that you're working with in-house at a developer that's implementing your music. Is that correct? So, you know, when you're being asked to deliver content, you know, the decision to go music and, you know, spatialized and how to do that, what does that discussion topic look like with the developer, and what are you asked to deliver? Yeah, how does that all play out?
So I'm a freelancer, which means that I'm a contract composer, and my work always comes through referrals, but I'm never in-house. I work at home now, my own home studio. So I've learned to be incredibly intuitive and also shamelessly ask a lot of questions, never be afraid to ask questions. And I learned this when I began composing for video games. I wouldn't write the first note. I don't even write one theme until I have had many conversations in great depth about the technology, about how the music is going to be implemented, about my deliverables, which we'll talk again later, and also so that I literally have to invent the methodology of composing based on the technology and how the music is going to be implemented before I compose the first note of music. That lesson has served me well. So with virtual reality in particular, because VR is such a physical experience, in my opinion. It's a very visceral experience. It's not something you watch or even interact like in a traditional game. It's something that you feel. The most important thing for me was to go to the studio and play the prototype just at my hiring interview. I'm going to talk about The Mummy for a moment because that's an interesting experience. So how this all materialized, I got referred by a colleague, game composer, and he said to me only one thing. They're on a horrible deadline. You have 3 weeks to do 10 minutes of music and action music. And the musical style guide is Marco Beltrami, World War Z. So of course I went home and I started just tearing apart Marco Beltrami, who is a studio composer for film, and his music is very heavy action, very heavily orchestrated. It's hybrid orchestral. So I kind of went under the assumption that that's going to be the musical model. That was the first step. So the second step was me going to interview at the studio and actually play the game. The game is very physical. It involves sitting, standing, shooting. There are iconic characters, like you begin the game with a SWAT kind of team, and then there's zombies that you shoot. So I understood that's the gig. Now, my first version was tossed out because I followed the direction to do action orchestral music, and they said, well, this is really good, but it's not going to work in VR because it's too busy. Go simpler. That's to echo the conversation we had earlier. So I tossed that wonderful hybrid action music and went in the direction of two directions. Ambient and iconic sound signature, because that's also incredible lesson I learned as a game composer, that music serves to add that sonic signature for the character, for the game, and also this is what makes the game experience memorable. In other words, music is what makes the game memorable. In that sense, composing for games is somewhat similar to composing for TV advertisement, because essentially you're coming up with these sonic signatures that will be remembered long after the game has finished. Because also VR games are like, what, 10, 15 minutes? And the whole point is to have some memory of that wonderful, awesome game. The Mummy, by the way, is at the VR IMAX theaters around the country, and also in Los Angeles at the Hollywood Highland Arcade.
And how many minutes of music did you say it was?
10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes. So after I switched gears and went into the direction of ambient music and kind of iconic signature for the SWAT team and then the signature for the zombies, everybody was super happy. So my deliverables were stems, very carefully calibrated stems, mostly by instruments and by frequencies, like, high instruments separate from low instruments. I had to work together with haptics and also with the low sub-frequencies that they were going to feed from the back. So you experience this particular game through very conventional stereo headphones. So whatever tools that were used for the implementation had to work with conventional, not the awesome Ausic headphones or any other 3D headphones, but very conventional headphones. And I understood, so I basically had to deliver the music in stems, which is pretty typical for game delivery, but very carefully calibrated in terms of instrumentation and frequencies, because this is also, it's very hybrid, it's ambient, so it's not orchestral, and that's how I delivered.
Nice. And was there a discussion about, spatial music? Like, are we going to spatialize elements? You know, sometimes musical stingers, even at a very basic level, hey, we need the player to look over here. Were there elements like that where that was a discussion?
Absolutely,
Or
yeah.
okay, yeah.
This was a discussion. The frequencies actually were a discussion. Stingers were discussion, and my understanding was that they put the violins like sort of high in a higher sphere, and then the main sort of body of the music was kind of what you hear, 5.1, you know, that kind of central plane.
Yeah, yeah.
And the sub frequencies were behind, but I was not doing them. Somebody else was doing
Sure,
them in the
yeah, yeah,
studio.
no.
But I had to be aware of the physicality of the game, and all the rest of the audio
Yeah.
events were present. Yeah.
So I'm curious, were the stems, you know, frequently in traditional games you're delivering stems for interactivity. Were the stems interactive at all, or were they purely spatial stems?
Spatial stems, and the only interactive element were the stingers. The stingers.
That's
are
right. Yeah,
separate.
no, it's amazing. You know, different. It's a similar delivery process, totally different usage,
Yeah.
and and it's very interesting as well. You know, bringing up. It's always been the case with games. You design sound to picture, you put it in game. Oh wow, that sounds terrible. Nothing like when I saw it on picture, but a whole nother level with the spatial audio tech. And yeah, I think this is a great segue to spatial music. You know, at, especially Sally's done a lot with this too. I know. You know, there's kind of two camps of. To spatialize or not to spatialize.
That's me.
You know? No, and I fully believe, depending on the experience, you know, you kind of have to make this decision of, you know, what are you going to spatialize in the music? Is it going to take the player out by making it too obvious, or is it going to immerse and help? Sally, give us the spatial music rundown as well.
Yeah, like I've spoken on a lot of panels at various sized events, from conferences right down to little meetups, and this topic comes up pretty often. And most of the time, I feel like it's usually slightly technical sound designers that will be like, music should never be spatialized. It should always be just stereo, and you should just do that because it confuses the player. It takes up too much space if it's spatialized. And I'm one of those people that believes the opposite. But I also completely agree with you that you need to decide what's really important for your project. I just think that a lot of people communicate that combining stereo and 3D fields is cleaner and to understand and localize within than putting a 3D field within a 3D field and being very mindful of that. And I actually completely believe the opposite, and would, you know, as you kind of pointed out before, like when I was working with Zero Latency, we have a warehouse-size free roam VR kind of installation. There's one in Vegas if you feel like going there, where we had 3 different projects that we were working on. One's a zombie shooter, one was a robot shooter, and then the third one was a puzzle game with no shooting. So the team had always, in their previous project, they had music in their, had versions with music in there, and they were just kind of like library tracks that they just throw in to kind of up the ante a lot. And a lot of that was done to kind of just keep the energy high. But in my mind, it made it feel very arcadey because you're just kind of like they were just cramming in like more sound within that space. And it was actually really clouding up. Like a lot of guitars were clouding up your ability to hear where the zombies were, if they were behind you, like those sorts of things. And you have 6 people in a space shooting at the same time. It's just really...
I've been slowly swayed more and more toward the spatial music, so yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did is I said, look, in these shooting games, we're not having any music. We're just going to have really kick-ass sound design, and I did that, so that was good. And then in this puzzle game, it's a beautiful Aztec theme. I worked with a composer, so I did a similar process to what you just described, Penka. So I worked with Aaron, and I gave him a brief, and he went off and wrote, I think, 4.5 minutes of music just that I could continuously loop. And we worked with a couple of stems, and then I ended up saying, look, I want to like completely bust this out of the park, so I'm going to spatialize this music. And I have a plan about how I want things to start really far away, like they're floating in on the wind, and then come in and become more cinematic towards the end when you're finishing up the final puzzles. And he ended up delivering to me just each individual instrument was by itself. We had 3 different levels of intensity, and then I worked that into 5 different levels of intensity of spatial mix that started off very, very, very far away, as if it was being blown in on the wind with very specifically selected reverbs that Aaron baked into it as well. And then also I brought those instruments in, and I was able to do similar sort of thing where you said we placed the strings high. I placed particular instruments high. I had an array of drums in the back as well, so they all had their own very specific spatial areas that I put them in, and I was very, very mindful about why I was selecting particular instruments to go somewhere. So working alongside some of the psychoacoustics research that I've been looking into, saying like, okay, I understand that particular frequencies are able to be localized to particular zones very well, so I want to kind of play off that a little bit and see if it helps people or see if it gives them a particular feeling. And people really enjoy that piece of content. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. There's no shooting, you're just talking to each other and solving puzzles. So there's a lot of space for that there. And a lot of space, and it's kind of ethereal. Like, when you walk around, you float around and there's like sparkles that explode out of your back. So like, people aren't really taking it very seriously. But I really think it's something that people should experiment with more. It's like this idea of combining the linear workflow and the interactive workflow and taking some of that ability to have spatialized instruments and kind of baking that spatialization in, and then being able to do that in the engine, just kind of play it back in the engine. It's a really interesting process. You can learn a lot. It's very fun as well, so get in it.
And were you working with a separate mixer to deliver these stems, or was there more back and forth? Like, how did I'm just curious if the process, did they, you know, what was their level of, hey, we need this very specifically, you know, in the mix, delivered in the stems, or?
The privilege of working on the frontier means that we have no precedents, which means you have to become so intuitive and so self-driven in a way of asking questions. This is a privilege. It's also a tremendous challenge, and I don't take it lightly, because in the case of The Mummy, I had 3 weeks to compose 10 minutes of music, which kind of started action, but then ended up being mostly ambient and kind of iconic sound signatures. So I had, also the studio did not have an audio director. Basically, I worked with the producer, the senior producer, who was my boss, and a wonderful sound designer, Aaron Brown, who is based in Austin, Texas, who was the guy implementing into his, alongside his sound design, and then that implementation was going to get baked into the Unreal audio engine for VR, because that game was created in Unreal. The maker is Starbreeze, StarVR. They have a proprietary headset, which is known for the most high fidelity of visuals. But the headphone was a conventional headphone.
Sure, yeah.
So Aaron was my sort of tech person, and I just asked a lot of questions. And I was really, again, before I composed the music, before I even, you know, delivered anything, we had a lot of conversations. You know, let's try this. What do you think is going to be? Do you think it's going to work out? And then Aaron had a lot of really good suggestions. So. That's how we worked back and forth. A lot of iterations, a lot of questions back and forth, very good communication, which I encourage all composers to always do. Because, and one point I wanted to make also slightly separate but also related. In video games, I've only worked for 8 years in games, and now I'm branching out into VR and theme parks. Every single assignment, every single professional assignment, professional job has always had its own set of challenges. Technical challenges, collaborative challenges, creative challenges. And it's my duty, sacred duty as a composer and an artist, to ask all the questions that I could ask and really listen very closely, distill all the information, really sort of create a gestalt in my mind, create a picture, create a workflow, create a methodology of composing first, even conceiving of the music, and then certainly delivering the deliverables, because every single job has had a slightly different set of challenges and requirements. And especially in VR, that's, I mean, like I've done the NASA exhibit and the Mummy, and they were very different. Yeah. And the approach was very different. So it's always about communicating and really having that vision in your mind before getting into the dirty work, because you want to save time.
For sure. Right.
I just want to add in there, like you mentioned Aaron Brown there. Yeah. He actually gave a really good talk about VR audio at the Austin Game Conference last year. So particularly if you're interested in like some of the psychology of like why we should do particular things in a mix, like his presentation was pretty fantastic.
He was wonderful. He was awesome.
Great. Yeah. Abesh, I'm curious, so you've been in this since sort of the beginning of the inception of, you know, kind of the development of these new plugins. Where are things going now? Are they pushing toward better performance, better sounding things, more features, you know, geometry-based reflections? What's on the horizon? What are people now trying to accomplish?
The first thing that everybody should try and accomplish is to get everyone using tools.
So that's a good one too.
Yeah. So I'll kind of draw into what the future holds versus some of the challenges that people face, some of the obvious questions that they'll probably segue into nicely. One of the things that was brought up and very important is coloration and usage of filters. So a challenge which I doubt if people had to deal with as much is if you design an experience which sounds very differently in your mix stage, and it's going to sound very differently on YouTube, and when it goes to Facebook, it's going to sound completely different. That's something that people haven't really thought of earlier. And it's because when you've had a normal stereo stem delivery, well, not normal, stereo delivery or standard 5.1 delivery, the only thing clouding the output was the choice of hardware, so the choice of speakers that people would have set up. So whether it's coming out of television screens, how much high dynamic range do you want to put in the content, or how much it would. All of that still holds with the addition of what the renderer itself is. So playing back stereo content through traditional operating system level decoders is different than an HRTF filter that is either proprietary or open, or half proprietary, half open, how it chooses to render that content and through what hardware. So something that was mixed for VR and is meant to be played back over headphones, not only will it affect how are people watching that content. So is it only going to be up on YouTube, and is it only going to come out through phone speakers? Is it going to be an installation where you have complete control over, these are my headphones, this is the frequency response, this is the platform, everything it just makes it more fun that you have absolutely no idea of what your content will be like. But that is what pretty much people are trying to solidify. One is there's a constant effort to standardization, but haha, standards. There are quite a few companies out there who are trying to achieve some level of standardization in terms of the formats that you want to deliver. Now, again, the good news is it's pretty breaking ground, so there is no need for a particular standard and full stop that, hey, you need to deliver everything in first order ambisonics and nothing else. What we learned at 2 Big Ears and Facebook right in the beginning was YouTube had launched the ambisonic renderer much before we did. So we started experimenting with a mixed hybrid higher order ambisonics, which was close to a second order because we had to deal with Pro Tools' limitation of staying back in the 70s. But we also gave creators the opportunity to add a non-spatialized headlocked music track. So it ended up being 10 channels of audio, which was not, well, you can't play it back on YouTube or Facebook because nobody understands what 10 channels of audio is. So we would also ship our own renderer.
Maybe even just explain ambisonics on a very basic level.
That's a good
for them.
So ambisonics is a method of encoding data. It's pretty much instead of having discrete sources as you would expect in game audio. So if you have 5 sound sources, they can each be fed through a binaural renderer, and each sound can be rendered. What ambisonic does is it takes the entire scene level data, so you might have, say, 128 sources, and encodes all of that into spherical harmonics. So around a sphere, around a particular user's center point, all of that is measured as a ratio of the pressure on that sphere. The advantage is you kind of cap off the CPU usage. So instead of having 128 discrete sources, you can have 1 or 128 all on a particular sphere. Now, this can be rendered based on the ambisonic ordering, which is basically a measure of the quality. So first order ambisonics, with something that, say, YouTube supports at this point of time, is 4 channels. So this ambisonic sphere, regardless of input, will have 4 output channels, and that gets rendered in real time. What we have at Facebook is close to second order, which is 9 channels. And then with proprietary systems, you can have 16 and 64. So there is a theoretical limit on how high up, like you can go to 7th order ambisonics, and to a normal consumer, a 5th order and a 7th order may not really make much sense, but it depends on the content. If there's a lot of spectral analysis, you don't want to render it in first order. But therein lies the challenge as well. Maybe the toolset that you're using supports third order ambisonics, and your mix stage is obviously somebody has paid for it, so it's fantastic, but the customer hears it on YouTube over a phone, maybe with headphones not even plugged in. The entire spatialization effect is just gone. The coloration that you would have never heard in your mix stage would then be applied. When it gets played back on Facebook, it would sound different. So these are some of the challenges that people are trying to work on. The other thing that I've seen in this space is customized or personalized HRTFs, because all of us have hopefully different head shapes and sizes and different ear shapes. It does affect how we are going to perceive the same ambisonic field or a discrete sound field through an HRTF filter. And it's an area of, well, I would say it's good that people are investing in it, but I doubt there will be a large-scale solution anytime soon, because You may go to a 3D image scanning company right now, have your own customized filter, and then you create something that really sounds, behind it. Or what you end up having is front-back confusion and so on if you have a mismatch of HRTFs. But you cannot guarantee that 2.1 billion people on Facebook have also had their heads scanned and their personalized HRTFs, which means it's a trade-off. But it's an interesting area of research which I undoubtedly would be normal in the coming decade or so. And one final bucket I would put in is, well, there are 3 buckets actually. It's the creative, the academic, and the technical. The creative part is the actual plugin design itself, and that applies to plugin design over the decades. People are trying to solve workflows that you have a 360-degree video. That itself is crazy. You can no longer dictate what people are watching. That's it. All your plans are down the drain. How does that fit into a conventional video editor? How does an ambisonic feel? How do you cut sound to that if you're not in Pro Tools? You give it to your DP and he opens it in Premiere. That's it. Again, your plans are all foiled. So there's a creative part of dealing with workflows and how to make it easy to place sounds and add real-time room reflection. So do you have a cube and add artificial reflections? Do you analyze the entire mesh? Do you have actual specular reflections based on occlusion? The possibilities are endless. There are thousands and thousands of academic papers, but not a lot has been translated into the practical studio itself. So studios would end up using what makes sense to them. 3 weeks, I was actually surprised. Most of the clients that I work with or talk to, they have 3 days, obviously on a 90-day project because you don't need sound really. So people are always on a deadline. So it's good that there's a lot of research happening, and there's a lot of research happening on the workflow side because we have to make it obvious to design and transparent to the consumer. They shouldn't have to do anything extra to hear the spatial sound effects. That if a zombie does growl behind you, they would naturally look back. You don't need a UI sticker telling you there's a zombie, please turn around. That would be the failure.
You've opened up so many great cans of worms, and I feel like everyone is chomping at the bit here to jump into the, we'll do personal HRTFs and all these things. I do just want to ask one thing. Ambisonics, is it an overgeneralization to say, people have been talking about, recording ambisonically, and this seems to be good for 360 video where you're recording maybe like a scene, but with a game, it's more limited unless you're in a situation like a cockpit where you're kind of fixed. Would you say almost like with interactive or VR in general, ambisonics is not linear video aside so much for recording, but as performance and optimizing, taking things that were recorded as mono point sources and rendering them down? Would you say that's even the more particular usage than recording? We shouldn't all be out recording ambisonic libraries of waterfalls.
I mean, you can.
Sure.
I would just say ambisonics is all down to workflow and optimization. And the reason ambisonics has become more popular in the 360 video space is there is no underlying format to playback object-based audio. I mean, G-Audio is investing in it, Fraunhofer is investing in it, but it's not already in place. What is in place is you give somebody a 4-channel AAC stream and they will decode it. They'll feed it to the renderer. But those infrastructure layers exist, and hence ambisonics. So you would always have those 9 channels of data, or when we started with 8 channels of data, and we would fool the decoder saying, consider it as 7.1, don't apply your brains to it, just transport these 8 channels of data. That's why ambisonics. And the reason we build tools is obviously make it easy that you can have lavs and you can have spot mics, and you can bring them all into that ambisonic, encoding. You don't even from a microphone perspective, you only have first-order microphones, which is 4 channels, which sounds okay for an ambience, wouldn't be your final Grammy-winning performance. Well, in terms of quality, technical quality, not in terms of composition. So there are limitations. It's a workflow optimization end of story. Whereas with games, you don't have that. You are shipping a game, and you can have your 128 sources playing back as objects, and you wouldn't face any of the video playing my QuickTime doesn't play back 128 sources issue.
Yeah. No, great. Definitely want to get to personalized HRTFs. Adam, did you want to piggyback off of that at all? I know with G-Audio's technology. It's okay if no, we can go to personal HRTFs.
I mean, one thing I would say is everything that's been said, it kind of reinforces this reality that we're at the very beginnings of this. And because there are so many questions that are actually major questions. that relate, in my opinion, directly to the fidelity of the experience. And just to touch on HRTF for a second, I think that that is one of the main causes of, you know, colorization and fidelity issues, and it's like this huge unanswered question, like how are we ever going to have personalized HRTFs?
That stands for head-related transfer functions, by the way.
We're really going to measure
there,
everybody's heads somehow? I mean, you know, and then there's like this generic head, like, you know, okay, that probably doesn't work, but a lot of companies, including G-Audio, use a composite head idea. I mean, it sounds very strange, but I think these are some quality issues and workflow issues and technology issues that are sort of we're just at the beginning of solving.
Yeah, and Sally, I think you have a really unique perspective on personalized HRTF. Sally has been working for the last year for OSIC, which makes a hardware headphone that kind of, I'll let you go from there, but yeah. Tell us more.
Yeah, OSIC, we had a software and hardware combined pipeline. So with the hardware as a pair of multi-driver headphones, so there are 4 drivers in each ear cup, and also like a head tracker and a sensor in the headband so that it could actually tell the size of your head, and the sensors in the ear cups that could take the shape of your ear and use that to personalize the processing that we were doing on the fly, which is really super cool. And we got a lot of really great feedback that it was some of the, you know, best experience that they'd had for, you know, people listening to our demos through those particular pair of headphones with that technology enabled. And that's kind of one solution, one way to do it. Obviously still very difficult because you're still relying on people to buy that hardware, to buy into that system, content creators to be using that software so that it all works together and there's an ecosystem platform, if you will, of content, and then also people that are, you know, consuming that content as well. But when it comes to like other types of personalization, like Abesh, you touched on it before, there's like a lot of companies that are, not a lot of companies, but there's a couple, like I think Own Surround is one of them, where you're able to take like a video scan of your head and then they develop a model of your head out of that, and they use that for developing a individualized or customized HRTF for you. So that's another approach that we'll probably see more and more companies like that. But like, we keep on talking about like challenges within the industry, and getting to a point where we can have that technology is going to be really super great. But then again, like the question of adoption is another one. Are people really going to be using this technology? How are they going to take that HRTF, and which tools are they going to be able to plug that into? Like, is Facebook going to make an open hole that they can plug the HRTF into? I don't know. I don't know, but that would be cool, right? Because Facebook, obviously, it's one of the, you know, has the largest library of content possibly in the world for 360 stuff. I don't know. I'm just making this up.
And pictures of everybody's heads.
Oh, that's scary. Oh my God.
And just at a very basic level here, and I know this is something many of our clients have not understood going in, you know, these spatial audio plugins, they work with any headphones. So you can wear any headphones, and that's the beauty. And you know, OSIC offers a more robust, better sounding, you know, potentially, and field, because you're purchasing the hardware, you're getting the personal HRTF, but a normal spatial audio solution works with any pair of headphones. But it also, it doesn't work not with headphones. Like, you're not going to put it on your mobile game, and it's not going to suddenly be spatial. You're not going to, you know, even if it's a stereo speakers, it's designed specifically for headphones. Like, yeah, if you're not wearing headphones, you're not getting the benefits of it, and it'll sound worse.
It's a can of worms, yeah. It's a can of worms.
Although I'm seeing more and more stuff coming out very recently about soundbars.
Oh yeah, you know, this is a very
Sennheiser at CES.
perfect segue.
They have a 3D soundbar.
Creative Technologies, Sennheiser.
Yeah. And hardware, you know, kind of, and you know, Dolby kind of experimenting with object-based, you know, Atmos.
They're all different output formats. Like, they're different types of hardware to achieve a spatial field with.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not like you're going to use one panner to be able to deploy two headphones, like miscellaneous headphones X, and then also be able to deploy that same mix out to that soundbar. You're going to have to do a separate mix for that platform.
Yeah, people need to be aware of that.
Because it's going to sound very different. The understanding of your spatial field in that would be very, very different. So, like, to assume that you can just plug it in there and it'll work, it probably might sound a little bit whack. But I haven't tried it yet, so that'd be something that I'd be really interested to test. It's like, how do you develop a test creatively so that you understand the difference between what I hear when I have, you know, headphones and what I hear when I'm getting my spatialization from afar.
For sure. Did you want to chime in there, Abesh?
Yeah, so just on a technical level, so ambisonics itself, it can be decoded to multiple formats. So headphones is something that makes sense for VR because you would want the person to be immersed in the content, and head tracking comes with it. So whether it's a smartphone-based or a PC-based VR, you know the head tracking is happening. That being said, the workflow doesn't need to change at all for a 5.1 or a 7.1 static output. Just like if you wanted to use normal game middleware or a game engine, your mix wouldn't have to change just because you would have, you will want to change it, but doesn't have to if you want to have specific, here's my stereo output, here's my War Tapes 5.1 output, there's my headphone output. And that depends on the technology, and that's on us technology creators to make it ubiquitous. What is challenging is the preview. If the content designer gets the chance to preview all the possible platforms it's going to be played back, and they're happy with each mix, then that makes sense. What doesn't happen is if it's specifically for a particular platform or specifically for a particular format, and then it plays back somewhere else because we never control where it's going to be played back. You have no idea
what the consumer is going to do.
So heard back the next morning, hey, so how was the Facebook mix? Facebook? No, it was for YouTube. Like, oh, okay.
I've done multiple Daydream projects, and on all of them, there's been QA bug reports that come back. The sound is all on the left. Yep. What does that mean? We're trying to figure it out. Oh, they have the phone mounted on their face with the speaker on the left, and there's no headphones.
If I can
involved.
take 10 seconds, one of the common feedback that I get is, hey, we had this first order ambisonics, but it's only being very left biased, and everything is gone, and the project's canceled, I've lost my job, etc. And it turns out it's obviously left biased because they try to double click it in VLC Media Player or in QuickTime and preview the ambisonic file. Now, QuickTime doesn't support that. Yeah. So if you have 4 channels of audio in ambisonics, the first channel, the W channel, is your mono. So it contains all the information. And the XYZ channel number 2, 3, 4 have the directionality. So when QuickTime plays back that 4-channel audio, it selects W or the omni channel as left, and the first direction as right. So obviously you hear all your content on your left, and people are like, nope, it doesn't sound right. I'm going to not do spatial audio ever in my life. Like, just upload it to YouTube.
Yeah. Anyway, well, pulling back from the technical here, just if we're running out of time, and I wanted to leave a minute for questions, but if we each wanted to just touch maybe on, storytelling in VR. How has VR affected storytelling? And I think, again, Gordon McGladdery and I were having a discussion, and he brought up a very great point that the traditional mix hierarchy of in a film or a game, maybe dialogue's the top dog, you got to hear it, and this isn't true for every game, but of course, but that is a generalization, you got to hear it. And then there's music happening, and sound effects will pop out and take over as things happen. But in VR, like you can pick up this, and I can shake this in front of my face, and if it has a little jingle, like suddenly nothing else matters because this is right here, and this is the most important thing. And that's kind of really changed kind of how the storytelling arc sometimes progresses in games, and how people, if they want to interact with something, the rest of the game is on hold. Anyway, I don't know, so interesting idea, but what about you with music, Penka?
Personally, I believe in VR tremendously and in the power of VR to tell emotional stories. I already personally have had one experience that was very emotional for me. It was linear VR storytelling. It's a piece called Giant by Milica Zek, and be sure to check it out. It's at the Technicolor Experience Center if you have a chance to go there, because it really makes you incredibly emotionally immersed in this story it's telling. So I believe in the power of immersive storytelling in VR, and as a composer, my 2 most important jobs are to create the best possible music that's emotional, but also to make the experience memorable. So when you finish it and when you go home and years later, weeks later, you still remember how it made you feel. That's what I aspire to do.
I think I'm going to throw a little cold water on this.
Go for it.
Actually, what I was, because you suggested looking at that VR Noir 360 degree movie, which is actually kind of interactive.
Yeah, it's a branching narrative story.
And it kind of reinforced my thinking that we've taken a big step back, like out of necessity in storytelling in VR, because we don't know what the hell we're doing. Yeah. Like, what role does audio play? And everyone always says, oh, well, audio is the cueing device. We can't edit, so audio, will direct the player where he or she needs to look. Well, okay, but we haven't really gone into that in depth, and it all seems very new and very kind of 90s to me, like 90s meaning like the way the way video games looked back in the 90s when, the Seventh Guest and Myst were like the hot shit. That's kind of the impression I'm getting. We've kind of had to step back so that we can figure this out, and I'm sure years in the future we'll find out how to deal with this in a sophisticated way.
Yeah, just to speak to that, like we've taken super advanced versions of so many different technologies and we've smashed it together, called it a new media paradigm, and now we're expecting to make the best content ever straight off the bat. It's just like, of course we're going to suck. And of course the workflow is going to be hard and things are going to crash and all sorts of weird things are going to happen. But just to answer the question really quickly, I'll answer in a different way. So as a sound designer, one of the things that you can do, like one of the things that you have to do to really tell a story and to create that way of guiding players and kind of doing it very subconsciously is actually by creating your own understanding and paradigm or way of thinking about what space means and what interaction means for sound in virtual reality experiences. So I have a thing that I present about, like a couple of slides that I talk through about this, where I have a couple of zones that I talk about. So the intimate zone, so anything that you can grab with your hands and interact with, that's really important. Things that are going to kill you are really important. Things that you should probably pay attention to are really important and should be prioritized over other stuff that's going on. And I tend to have very different priority kind of levels depending on how things are far away as well, and whether you want players to move towards them. So there's a lot of thinking that you need to do and a lot of sculpting that you need to do with attenuation and volume and effects over that kind of space to make sure that you're telling the story with the spatial characteristics and properties of sound as you're designing sound as well.
Just to cap it off, the exciting thing about VR is you have the consumer's full attention. The scariest part about VR is you have the consumer's fullest attention, because every mistake that you thought that you could just get by on, they're not going to turn on the TV volume as much. They're going to hear it, whether it's visual, whether it's audio. It's going to be amplified 1,000 times. And one thing that definitely works in VR is what doesn't work comes out really quickly. The moment you put on the headset, the moment you start the experience, the first thing people would do is, oh, I'm feeling dizzy, or this doesn't work for me, or this is too loud, oh, what's that glitch, or what's that window? Problems would pop up really quickly. So that means in storytelling, what I have seen works for me is when it's really down to the basics. That you've got the consumer's full attention. What do you want to do with it now? You no longer have to wrestle between a second screen and the snacks in front of you and everybody in their living room.
That's very true, yeah. No, that's great. Great stuff. Well, fantastic. Any questions at all?
Great talk. I've learned a lot from all of you guys. Thanks so much. You've talked a lot about VR. Let's talk about AR briefly and how the spatialized audio has to be adjusted and improved for that.
It's even more of a frontier.
Yeah, AR is definitely, it's a really fun space, and it's something that we started looking into at OSSIC last year. So AR is really interesting because you're putting virtual objects into the real world, and at some point, you're making a decision, creatively about whether people want to really be in that thing needs to be in that space, how deeply it needs to be in that space, and how superficially it can be out of that space as well. So there's that creative decision that you need to make, which you spoke a lot about earlier today. I really liked that. But then there's also all of the technical challenges that go along with okay, so we've decided that I want R2-D2 on the floor there. It's what am I going to have to do technology-wise to actually, make him be there? And to be honest, humans are really, really good at knowing when something is not there by the sound of it. So for me, I see a lot of development that needs to happen around visual recognition of what an acoustical space will be, and then also being able to factor that into the processing that's happening to that object, so that that object, when it makes the sound sounds like it's in the room that you're into. And yeah, to to me, that's kind of the biggest challenge that I see there. And then, of course, like devices need to get even more powerful to be able to do all that kind of rendering. And then what kind of sensors do we need attached to those devices? How are we going to do that scanning to make all of that happen? There's so many questions in that space. There's not very many tools at all that you can use for doing that. And, oh, yeah, so yummy.
Just on not on a different vein, even a basic thing as loudness. So if you have a real person speaking whose sound you would obviously be able to hear with your own ears, and a virtual object whose sound is going to be projected on your ears because it's not going to be fully closed back headphones, right? Even a difference in loudness breaks the immersion that you want to create. So how do you calculate that? So.
And I was just going to add, you said deeply, if a virtual object is deeply inserted into reality, how are we going to deal with the sound design needs of that virtual object? Because we can interact with it in various different ways. There's no way a sound designer is going to, be able to provide all of the possible interactions in sound effects. So we're going to have to come up with procedural solutions for material types, perhaps. So it's a really interesting area.
I enjoyed that. Like VR, I felt like there were like a lot of like good solutions were presented, and then you're like AR, and we're all like, we're screwed. Anyway, thanks so much for coming, and I think people will be outside if you have questions. Really, thanks so much, everyone. Fantastic.